A Living Faith pastor has just been sentenced to death for the unaliving of his own landlord, a 23-year-old final year student named Gabriel Bassey. You see, when stories like this break out, you just sit back, think and ask yourself, what exactly is happening in some churches? Because I don't understand if this whole church is becoming a business that they don't now vet their pastors before making them leaders of flocks. This whole incident happened in 2020 and it has been in court ever since, and judgment was just recently passed. Gabriel was 23 years old as at the time of the story, and he was a final year student. His mother has just passed and left a property which he had inherited after her passing. Inside that property was a hall that used to operate as a nursery school. There are speculations that his mom had owned a nursery school, but after her unaliving, this nursery school closed down and this hall was now later rented out to Living Faith Church, also known as Winners Chapel. Now, the church, after paying to use the hall for a period of time, they decided to bring in a pastor to conduct services and literally grow the church. And this pastor was Pastor Prince Emmanuel. I think at this point, we shouldn't even be calling him a pastor again, because what he did, I don't think he deserved to be called that name. Now, when Pastor Prince Emmanuel came into this church, everything started to feel wrong. Everything literally went left. The people of those vicinity do not know where this pastor came from or what qualifications he had. Nobody even know the criteria that he had on him that made him fit to be a pastor, not to talk of a lead pastor. Like I said, I really do not understand how churches operate these days and how they're able to vet people to become pastors of churches, because I think a lot of evaluations need to just take place. Or maybe these kind of pastors are just so deceitful that they are able to even deceive leaders of this church. Or it might just be in cases where these pastors are more concerned about expansion and they do not do proper checks. Because if proper checks had been done, we might not even have been talking about this story today. From the reports that we've had, Pastor Prince was not just difficult, he was literally erratic. He was troublesome, had a history of questionable behavior. Now, when this pastor came into that church as a pastor and realized that the person that owned the property wasn't some old man or some aged person, but was a 23-year-old boy, I felt it did a lot on his ego. Gabriel wasn't just a 23-year-old student. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment inside the same compound with his brother Emmanuel. His routine was quite simple: go to school, manage the compound, and collect rent from the church, which was 150,000 naira per year. I'm assuming that everything else about the church was not his business because he was still a student schooling at that time. At some point, Pastor Gabriel approached Emmanuel with a request of parking some of the church properties in his house because the church building didn't have proper windows or doors, and keeping those properties in the church building would risk it being stolen. And these properties were just literal properties like speakers, chairs, instruments. When Gabriel heard of this, he decided to go consult his father first. So he told his father that the church wanted to keep some properties in the house where he stayed, and his father, being a very good man, allowed him. So he got permission from his father, and then he allowed the pastor to start to pack these properties in his house. But this was where the tension began. Now remember this, Gabriel was a full-time student. So most days while he was in school, the house was locked. And in most cases, Pastor Prince would suddenly want to hold services within those times where he was in school, but the equipment he would need to hold these services would usually be in Gabriel's house. So this would make him to call Gabriel at hours where he was receiving lectures or probably busy with one schoolwork or the other. And Gabriel would have to leave school in those busy situations, come back, open the door, let them take the instruments and the church properties and go conduct their services. Some report says that Gabriel would ask for transport fare before coming down to his house, which is actually reasonable because somebody has to leave their busy schedule to come attend to you. I think that's not really something hard to do. But this arrangement started becoming a problem because the pastor would have to wait for hours until Gabriel returned before he can conduct the services, making them stay longer in church than they had planned to. And what should have turned to a simple landlord-tenant agreement started bringing a lot of tension and a lot of misunderstanding. The pastor decided to bring up a suggestion. Why not give him a spare key so that in cases where Gabriel was in school receiving lectures, they can always have access to the house without disturbing him or disrupting his schedule. At first, when Gabriel heard this arrangement, it sounded perfect because he was a pastor, he was a man that was supposed to be with integrity. He was a man of God, and giving him a spare key didn't really cause any case of suspicion at that time. But that arrangement didn't go well either, because not long after, Gabriel started to notice that things were missing in the church. He started from small things like plates to other properties that he had around the house, and sometimes items that he had kept in a certain place would be moved to another place. And this was suspicious because the pastor is meant to just go and take his properties and to leave. Everything that concerns Gabriel's house is literally not his business. And when Gabriel noticed that all these things were missing, he became suspicious because there was only one person that had a spare key into the house, and that was the pastor. Now imagine a situation where Gabriel had found himself. He found himself in a situation where he had to suspect a pastor, a supposed man of God. Gabriel telling the pastor this would literally do a lot to his ego. It would literally bruise his ego, because most of these men of God do not ever believe that they could ever do wrong. They do not believe that they are humans who could fall into temptation, who could have past sins that they've not fully let go of. So I'm guessing that Gabriel revealing this to the pastor would do a lot on the pastor's ego. And the pastor, looking at Gabriel as a 23-year-old boy, somebody that he was very, very much older than, he'll be like, who gave you the right to even talk to me or tell me that kind of thing? Do you know who I am? Do you know the kind of anointing I carry? As most Nigerian pastors will always say. But Gabriel didn't just let the pastor know about this. He went ahead to report this consistent disappearance to the headquarters in the vicinity. That is the initial people who had come for that property. Because Pastor Prince didn't rent the place himself. He was posted there. So when he reached out to these people, they gave him one solution. They told him he should collect back his spare key to avoid issues like that. And when Gabriel collected back his spare key, the issues of things disappearing stopped for a very long time. And this church didn't just tell him to collect his spare key. They even gave him money to buy new locks for his house, just in case Pastor Prince had made a spare key or he had a copy somewhere. Eventually, as this lock was changed, the whole issues of stealing, of him looking for things, stopped totally. Now, we don't really know how this affected Gabriel and Pastor Prince's relationship, but I am guessing that this would really make the pastor feel and look bad, because apparently the pastor is already looking bad in the presence of his superior. I'm guessing that they would have called him to vet him, to ask a lot of questions, and he might be so angry that Gabriel had bypassed him and went straight to the headquarters to report him. But then another issue came up: money. Now, it was said that a certain money, 150k, was given to Gabriel. So people said that this 150k was for renovation, while others said it's for rent. But I'm guessing that this 150,000 naira was for rent, because if it was for renovation, Gabriel has no business with that money. So I'm guessing that this amount was for rent. When Pastor Prince heard that this money was given to Gabriel directly, like the senior pastors give it to Gabriel directly instead of giving it to Pastor Prince to give to Gabriel, he was so angry. I'm guessing that did a lot to his ego. And probably Pastor Prince felt disrespected because he believed that the money should pass through him so that he could reinforce his authority, and probably tried to be shady before handing the money over to his landlord. But nobody knows for sure. But this singular act started making the tension that was already there to grow even further. Nothing dramatic happened openly. There was no fight, no major scene until December 21st, 2020. That day, neighbors said that they heard somebody scream "Jesus" from inside Gabriel's house. And after that scream, they reportedly saw Pastor Prince came out of the building with a white garment stained with blood. He was also seeing a bucket stained with blood. And when the neighbors asked him what had happened, why someone was shouting and why he was blood stained, he said that he was praying, and after the prayer he tried to hang the banner, but instead he fell and injured himself. And because he was a pastor, people believed him. Nobody really pushed further to know if that was the case or if that was not the case, because a pastor, literally, you're meant to uphold integrity. So it's natural for people to believe that thing he said at first instance. But it would take 5 days for the horror of what had happened to be revealed. On the 26th of December, just a day after Christmas, a terrible discovery was made. The neighbors started perceiving a very terrible stench that was so strong that the neighbors could not ignore. That was when they knew that something was wrong, because this stench was coming from Gabriel's house. So they investigated further, went into the apartment and found Gabriel's body wrapped in a mat. They found a lot of stab wounds in his body and a knife lying just next to him. Police was called immediately, and the neighbors finally remembered the scream that they heard from the apartment just 5 days prior. They also recalled that the pastor was the last person that they saw leaving Gabriel's house that day. And because of how badly Gabriel's body had decomposed, he was buried that same day after the police had conducted their investigation. Now, during the course of this investigation, blood stains were found in some of the plastic chairs that were used in church, which indicated clearly that these chairs might have been taken from Gabriel's house after his unaliving. And from that moment, Pastor Prince became a prime suspect. And the shocking part was that reports suggested that even after Pastor Prince had unalived Gabriel, he would always return back to the apartment over the next 6 days to move church properties and go on with his day as if nothing had happened. Police eventually searched Pastor Prince's house and they found more items, along with Gabriel's personal belongings. Now remember, church equipment, church properties, we are not even meant to be in the pastor's house in the first place because the church is aware that these items were meant to be in Gabriel's house. So there's a speculation that he probably started moving all those things after he had unalived Gabriel. Now, there were also a lot of suspicions on why the pastor had rearranged the chairs, because it was said that this pastor just one day decided to rearrange the chairs in the church in a certain way that would back the entrance to the church so that the stench coming from Gabriel's house will not come directly to the church. I'm guessing he's trying to hide what he had done so that people would not really notice on time the gravity of what he had done. But what baffled me is how he could go about his daily activities knowing fully well what he had done to this young man. Pastor Prince was charged with the unaliving of Gabriel and remained in police custody. But the actual court trial began in 2021 with Pastor Prince pleading not guilty. You can imagine the audacity. With all the evidence and after all you're done, you're still saying you're not guilty. Now, during those trials, 6 witnesses were called. This included Gabriel's father and senior pastors of the church. Evidences presented showed that Gabriel and Pastor Prince had had prior quarrel relating to church properties, money, and other issues. And this was the main motive that the investigators picked for Pastor Prince unaliving his landlord, Gabriel. Now, let me be real here. There's a lot of men of God that use the title of pastor, that misuse the title of pastor to commit a lot of horrific acts. This is not the first time we're seeing cases like this. The cases might not be as brutal as this, but we've seen cases where these people hide under the umbrella of being men of God and that they cannot be questioned, they cannot be talked back to perform gruesome acts. And in most cases, the church usually end up covering them. And the reason why the church would always cover their pastors is because they are more concerned about their image than even restoring that person that has gone astray. Because whether you like it or not, these men of God are humans. These men of God, they go through the same temptations you go through daily. These men of God are not perfect. And then I'm also guessing that the audacity that this pastor had to go about his day, even after all he had done, was that he probably felt that, yes, because I am a pastor of so and so church, I can always get away with this because, yes, I can always hide it behind me, a pastor, do this kind of thing. I'm guessing he felt that people would always rally around him as a result of his stature as a pastor. But that was not the case. And I'm really, really happy with how this turned out. Because after more than 5 years, on February 19, 2026, the Akwa Ibom State High Court, sitting in Uyo, delivered judgment. And Pastor Prince was found guilty and sentenced to death. And to me, this was justice at last. Because let's pause for a second. Gabriel was just 23 years old. At 23, he was still very young, with his whole life ahead of him. At that point, he was just thinking of how to finish studying and probably achieve a lot of plans he had laid out. And one of the most shocking and painful things that we got to discover was that after he was unalived, his result was released and he graduated with a first class. Imagine such a bright soul taken away just like that because somebody could not just control his ego.